So my presentation, to be absolutely honest with you, is very, very, very personal. Last 8 years in Poland have not been very kind to me or to other lawyers who wanted to be on the bright side of the rule of law. But on the plus side, it gave me some time to reflect on what kind of a lawyer I would like to be. Because for me, the most precious moment in my life is to look in the mirror and like what I see. So when I say difficult 8 years, because those were moments of rejection, humiliation, instrumentalization of law, manipulation, but also very, very many personal incentives to join the dark side of the rule of law. And those were the moments when you either a lawyer or you are not. So the most important conceptual element in my presentation is this concept that I have been developing over the course of last few years. Becoming a lawyer. You are not a lawyer when you get your graduation diploma. You become a law graduate on that date, but you are not a lawyer yet. If you want to be a lawyer that moves beyond the diploma, you have to become a lawyer by doing the right things day in, day out. Little things. Speaking up where injustice happens. Showing solidarity with the oppressed, etc., etc. I will revert to that. You become a lawyer every day by little things that you do and by little things that you say. You are in a position to become a lawyer if you accept that becoming a lawyer is a state of potentiality. You have a chance to become a lawyer, but it is not guaranteed that you will become a lawyer in the end. So why this conceptualization matter to me? Because we are living in times where legal paradigms that we have been taking for granted, at least in this part of Europe, has shifted dramatically. In the past, everybody was in favor of liberalism and democracy. Today, Mr. Orban is in favor of democracy, but kills off the liberal components of the Hungarian legal system. Same happened in Poland since 2015. We were all in democracy, but we were against liberalism. We were against the government, the old government was against the rights of minorities, against the culture of restraint, against the fundamental rights, against the independence of the institutions. And this element of changing paradigms, that you can be pro-democracy and anti-liberal, this is something that we have to accept, because those Democrats often use the law in order to hollow out the liberal components of our legal systems. And on its face, on its surface, everything is according to the book. There are still the same institutions. The Supreme Court in Poland is still in the same building. The Constitutional Court is still in the same building. But if you look behind the veil of the appearances, those are not the same institutions speaking from the perspective of their identity and their function. The Constitutional Court in Poland is not a constitutional court because it does not serve as a constraint on the political power of the majority. So we as lawyers have to learn how the smart, legalistic-minded autocrats hollow out our legal systems by using legal instruments. Again, on the surface, everything is perfect, legally perfect. But the very hearts of those liberal institutions that we look at have been ripped out, and those institutions have been changed irreparably. So this is my starting point. Then, if you have this changing context of this environment, you ask yourself a question. What does becoming a lawyer mean as a potentiality? Lawyer that you might become says no to cheating by way of legalistic schemes and meanings. You have a chance to say no. Whether you do it, it's up to you. So there is the potentiality. Lawyer that you might become says no to legal instrumentalization. Lawyer that you might become says no to cynicism in public life. Lawyer that you might become leaves nobody behind. Lawyer that you might become speaks up. So that's the starting point. You have a chance to become a lawyer. If you have a chance to become a lawyer, then the second question is, what kind of a narrative will dictate my parameters of belonging as a lawyer? And this I call the first principles of the European integration, which in my case, in my personal case, define me as a lawyer and give me a chance to become one. And there are certain principles that should be taken beyond the day-to-day politics. And Professor Grimm spoke about this importance of never again. And I inscribe myself as a lawyer within this movement of never again, because in the past, we Europeans saw how the law has been used to destroy the law. The constitutional order has been destroyed by legalistic schemes, by lies, by cheating, by being dishonest towards the legal system. So this principle of principles that define me as a lawyer and gives me a chance to become one is learning from the past. Do we lawyers, as European citizens, learn from the past where the law was abused in the service of the majoritarian politics? Question mark. Political power, the second first principle of the European legal order. Political power was to be constrained by law. The law and the institutions. The institutions that are independent of the political power, speaking on behalf of the law and independently of whoever rules politically speaking. Whether it's right, center, or left, every political power was supposed to be constrained political power. From my perspective of becoming a lawyer as a potentiality, this never again constitutionalism plays a special formative function. Because if I think of myself as a lawyer, I want to profess my loyalty to never again constitutionalism, which I define by Constitution is always the supreme law of the land. Fundamental rights, as spelled out in the constitutional document, set out the ultimate limits to the political power. Separation of powers is the ordaining principle of every legal system within the European Union. And finally, supranational adjudication. Strasbourg and Luxembourg as two institutions that are superimposed on the political process within each member state. We have learned from the past, so we cannot trust entirely the political process on the domestic level. We need some extra breaks, and in those instances, those breaks are provided by supranational courts that are on top of our political and judicial system. So lawyers face the world of a law graduate, because I realize that I have a chance to become a lawyer and I want to accept the challenge. But at the same time, there are many who call themselves lawyers, but in fact, they are law graduates. So if I have my narrative as a lawyer defined around the first principles, a law graduate has its own manifesto of principles that define him as a law graduate. A law graduate understands the role of a constitution completely differently from me. The constitution is no longer the supreme of the law of the land. It's simply a document that expresses the uniqueness of the state. The law equals the will of the majority for my law graduate. For the law graduate, rule of law and its understanding is changed dramatically, because the rule of law for the law graduate no longer frames the decision-making process, but rather It simply facilitates the expression of the will of the people. If it obstructs the unfettered expression of the will of the people, the rule of law must be rejected. So the rule of law no longer provides this check within the constitutional system on the power of the sovereign, since the power of the sovereign reigns supreme. For my law graduate, law has no independent standing. It is simply understood as the outcome of political action, day-to-day political action, instrumentalized, manipulated, bended to the expectations of my political masters. Constitutional court, we have heard, for a lawyer in post-war Europe, constitutional court was supposed to be the linchpin of our legal system. For the law graduate, constitutional court becomes simply an ally of the majority of the day, willing to simply fall in line with whatever is decided within the political process. But this is not what the constitutional courts were supposed to be in our understanding of the post-war consensus. So, in other terms, me as a lawyer that has a chance to become a lawyer on the one hand, and the law graduate on the other, we have two competing visions and narratives. Law graduates are simply guns for hire. They see the law as this technical instrument of social engineering that is devoid of any intrinsic values. Law can be manipulated, can be abused, as long as it serves the political agenda of the day. So if you have these competing narratives, you can then see yourself and set yourself within this broader context. What about Europe? We as lawyers here in this auditorium, we have to understand that value crisis, when one member state calls into question the shared element of the values that brought us Europeans together, it is not simply a governance crisis. It is a crisis that strikes at the very, very foundations of the European legal order. So it is not simply a crisis of governance, but it is a crisis of building blocks of the European edifice. So what are then, from my perspective of a lawyer, trajectories of those first principles? Never again, political power constrained by law, as we speak today. So in the past, in 1951, when the first treaties were signed, those first principles were deemed to exist. They were not spelled out in the treaties. We, the Europeans, have learned, so we don't have to put those first principles into a text, into a document, because we have learned. We don't need it. We take it for granted that the autocracy will never, ever arise out of the constitutional process at the level of a member state. That was back then. We accepted certain fundamentals as implicit within the European integration. Yesterday, we have moved on from implicit understandings and assumptions to explicit expressions. Today, we know what the rule of law means for all the member states of the European Union. What are the minimal elements of the judicial independence as framework principles? And today, rule of law as an essential precondition for all parties' mutual deferral to one another and to the union that they have created. If you dismiss a president of the regional court in Gdańsk, you are not acting within the European consensus that is accepted by all. You can have different institutional arrangements for appointing judges and presidents of courts, but there's a certain element, minimum element of understanding that you must not do X, Y, Z if you want to be true to the consensus. If you institute disciplinary proceedings because judges from Poland do send questions to the European Court of Justice, you place yourself outside of the European consensus built around those first non-negotiable principles. So that's why when I said value crisis, not a crisis of governance, but a crisis of foundations, I mean it. Because the rule of law, separation of powers, and judicial independence defines us Europeans. We share rule of law and trust in the institutions, and that's why we came together. We can have different visions for those institutions, but at the very core, we have to accept that there is something like judicial independence against the intrusions from the political power. How you implement the judicial independence within the core is left to all the member states, because the element of diversity is important. What's next then? And I bring my presentation to a conclusion. We lawyers, we have to face the paradigm change and adapt our language. We must not look for tanks in the streets in Europe. Those days and those dangers are luckily past us. But we must be more, as lawyers, vigilant towards new kinds of dangers. How the legal autocrats use the law graduates in order to destroy the liberal credentials of our legal systems. How they destroy the institutions. How they emasculate the judicial review, etc., etc. Using legal means, not by way of massive violations of human rights, by tanks in the streets, by crashing the opposition rights, etc. No, it will not, luckily, it will not happen in Europe in the foreseeable future. But the dangers are different, and we lawyers, we have to adapt our language and how we view the new dangerous world. So if we want to recognize and if we want to become lawyers and recognize those new dangers, we have to understand that the path of the constitution that will save the institutions and the liberal elements of our democratic systems is the new trajectory. It's from their constitution, the elite's constitution, to my constitution. From a court to my court. From a judge to good judge. Finally, to arrive at the law with the human face. But let me be very clear, and this is where the challenge for all of us, if we want to become lawyers, rests. If we want to become lawyers, we have to do this hard work every day to make sure that my constitution is indeed my constitution, that I understand what it says, that it protects me. We lawyers do have some basic duties in explaining to the people what it means to have a judge that is independent in your little town. How does it matter that in case of a controversy, you can go to your court and the court will decide according to justice, not to the whims of and expectations of whoever is at the political helm. So this becoming of a lawyer has this social aspect. We become lawyers because our law is not to be dissociated from society. And you often have courses, law and society. Wrong. Those courses should be called law in society, because the law is part of the social fabric. It evolves with the society. And who else than lawyers have a special responsibility to socially embed law? We do law. We are lawyers. Law is our business. But business beyond technicalities. Business that also embraces values. So what are then my rights as a lawyer? You have a right to ask a question: what has happened in Poland? What has happened in Hungary and elsewhere? You have a right to ask a question: what have you done? Where have you been? You have a right not to shake their hands. And I think the symbolic element is extremely, extremely crucial, because symbolism matters. Bad things have been done. We have to call a spade, because if not, then we will be indulging ourselves in the same hypocrisy that the law graduates love. We have to be better. You have a right to speak up about the dignity of the legal profession, not about your occupation, about the dignity of the legal profession. And then, of course, you have also duties. And that's the hard part. You have a duty to understand the signs before they become visible poisonous pills that will kill off the law. You have a duty to educate others. You have a duty to be not to be naive. No, that can't happen here. No. It can happen here. It happened in Poland. It happened in Germany. It happened in Hungary. Where have you been? You have a duty to be better than your enemies. You have a duty not to leave the people behind and to speak in the name of those oppressed. You have a duty not to be indifferent. You have a duty to leave a trace of decency. And finally, I started on a personal note and I want to finish on a very personal note. Those are my 5 nevers that have evolved with me over the course of last 8 years. Very difficult decisions, very difficult moments that faced me up front. And when I spoke in Ukraine last December at the Congress of Ukrainian Lawyers, I came up with this list that is still evolving. It's not a finished product. First, my first never allow the limitations and calculations of others to become your own. Be your own man. Never accept business as usual. And have the courage to say no. In your own little way, say no to comfortable routine. When something pains you, say something. Don't be indifferent. Never accept the view, no, that can be done. You can always do something here. You can always talk to your neighbors, to your community members, to say something, to explain, to educate. Do good things around you and it will create a synergy and it will move up. Because every good change starts right here. And I truly believe it in my own little way. Fourthly, never compromise when fundamentals come into play. When your constitutional court is being destroyed, there is simply no way to compromise over this. This is a non-negotiable. We have to restore the constitutional court to its full glory, to its constitutional authority, and there is simply no scope for compromise here. Finally, never look the other way when injustice happens. Speak up, say something. And finally, if you don't do this in your own little way, if you don't say something, if you don't do something around you, you are living in a state that might become not just a captured state at the level of institutions, but it would become a state with captive minds, attentive to the political commands of the majority, always willing to anticipate the expectations of the political masters. And of course, captive mind comes from Czesław Miłosz, famous zniewolony umysł. And in Miłosz's speech on the occasion of his Nobel Prize in Literature, he said this, and it really, really resonates with me to this day. In a room where people unanimously maintain a conspiracy of silence, one word of truth sounds like a pistol shot. Let us make sure that every now and then we can fire this pistol shot of truth. Then we will become lawyers. Thank you.